Logging on. My name's Cassie Holman. I'm the horticulture agent for the Post Rock District, which is 5 counties in north central Kansas. And my main office is in Beloit. So that's where I am today. I'm working out of home still. So hopefully by next couple weeks we can get back to the courthouse. But yeah, Kelsey and I decided to do this just to kind of create some programs to get some gardening education out there when we can't really be together, which is kind of sad, but we're going to make the best of it. So I'll let Kelsey introduce herself.
I'm Kelsey Hattisall. I'm the horticulture agent in River Valley District, which is Clay, Cloud, Washington, and Republic counties, and I'm housed in the Washington office, if I could talk today.
Yeah, I did not list all my counties. I have Smith County, Jewell, Osborne, Lincoln, and Mitchell County. So we have pretty much all of north central Kansas covered. So, but yeah, if you ever have gardening questions or need help with things in your landscape or lawn, we're happy to help. Our information is going to be in the PowerPoint, and you should have had it in the email as well. So feel free to always reach out to us. If you are kind of unfamiliar with Zoom, just know that if it does glitch or anything, if it goes away, just don't panic. It usually will reload, but hopefully we won't have any problems with that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint. Hopefully it will work. Okay, has everybody seen that? Okay. So I love talking about herbs just because they are such a fun plant to grow. So they're easy, and you're gonna find out that pretty much anybody can grow them. So that's kind of my funny way to get this started. But sage is also a fun herb we can grow. So there's my contact information. You should have it on the email, but we are happy to help with a lot of horticulture information, from turf care to gardens. And it's kind of a strange time right now, but we are still working, and we're happy to help with any questions you have. So keep that in mind as you're gardening. So we're going to start out with a little bit of herb trivia. So hopefully this works. I'm going to try to pull up a poll so that we can take a little quiz. So has everybody seen that poll? Hopefully if you're on a computer, you can see that. And this is totally anonymous. It's just a fun little activity. I'm not going to grade you on it, but it's just a little fun way to get started. There's a lot of history behind herbs. Okay. Looks like one more person is working on it. Did you do it, Kelsey?
No, on the host side, I get to see what everybody's picking.
Okay. Okay, I didn't know if I was waiting for you to do it or not.
Nope, sorry.
Telling me how many people have done it. This is a cool feature. So, okay, I'll wait like 10 more seconds maybe. There should have been a few easy ones in there. Hopefully everyone knew a couple, but okay, I'll go ahead and end it. Let's see if I can share the results. Okay, are you seeing the results now?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully. So the first question, Greek scholars often wore a garland of what herb to help their memory during examinations? So this one, it looks like a lot of people said rosemary, a couple for lavender and bay. It is rosemary. So they believed, they had some beliefs that it would help their memory, and so that's what they did. It's kind of cool. There's a lot of pictures you can find of them wearing those. True or false? You can eat the flowers of the herb chive. That is true. So we're going to talk about chives a little bit later, but they have a really fun purple flower, and you can eat them. So you can kind of pickle them in salads, and they're very healthy, I believe. So if you never have eaten them, you could try that this summer. Okay, this one, oh, everybody got this one, awesome. This herb is best known in the West as the pickle herb, and that is dill. So hopefully everyone likes dill pickles. And then what is the most widely used culinary herb? So yeah, there's some couple different answers on this. Parsley was the 3 people put parsley, and that is true. It is the most widely used one. And I think part of that is because a lot of people use it for decoration, like in their recipes, or when you go to a restaurant and it's kind of a garnish. So, but a couple people said basil. I probably use basil more than I use parsley. So just a fun fact. And then lastly, what herb gives pizza its signature flavor? That is oregano. So there's lots of different herbs you can use in recipes. It's really fun. Okay. Let me exit out of that. Okay. Are you still seeing the PowerPoint, Kelsey?
Yes.
Okay. So the first thing I wanted to kind of talk about, and this might seem silly, but I wanted to clarify how we say herb. So you can say it different ways. In Great Britain, it's usually pronounced with the H, so they say it like herb. In the United States, a lot of times we don't put the H on it. And if you look in a dictionary, actually the H is usually kind of it's crossed out or it's in parentheses, which just means it can be pronounced or it can be omitted. So either way you say it, we'll know what you're talking about, and you're totally correct either way. What is an herb? An herb is basically a plant that is used as a flavoring agent. So there can be lots of different definitions, kind of botanically, of what is considered an herb plant. But if you're using it for its flavoring and recipes, then that usually means that we're considering it an herb. And a lot of times we might think of the leaves as what we're using, but we can also use the seeds, the flowers, and even the roots of the plant. So lots of different ways we can use them. Okay, why are herbs so flavorful? What gives them their flavor? Well, the compounds produced in the plant are known as essential oils, and that is the essence of the plant's fragrance. So you've probably heard of essential oils. They've become pretty popular lately. People, sell them for health benefits and things like that. But basically, herbs are so flavorful and smell so good because they have a lot of essential oils in their leaves, or just in the plant in general. So these oils are soluble in water. They vaporize or volatilize to produce the aroma. So that's why when if you rub some leaves of a mint plant, you can smell it really well. And then the plants are concentrated when they're dried. So when we buy spices and dried herbs, a lot of times you don't have to use as much just because the flavor does concentrate. But you do have to be careful with that because you can destroy those oils when you're drying them or preserving them. So you do have to kind of consider how you're going to dry them or preserve them so you're not destroying the flavor of the herbs. So, and I will note that I'm not going to talk a lot about preserving and drying the herbs, just because today we're going to focus more on growing the herbs. But I am going to send out an email at the end with some more information, and we have some great publications from K-State that talks about how to preserve the plants. So, a little bit about the history of herbs. I think it's really fun. That's kind of why I like to do that trivia, just because there's a lot of mythology and history behind the plants. Some of the oldest horticulture writings actually are about herbs. They date back to like 2000 BC. So they've been grown for a long time. American pioneers used herbs for a lot of the same uses we use them for. They would season their food, curing illnesses, storing with linens, dyes and fragrance. So before they had refrigerators, their meat would kind of go bad before they could use it all. And so they would use herbs to cover up that taste, which is kind of gross, but it shows that herbs are so strong and flavorful that it can really affect the taste of your recipes. So there's a lot of cool history if you've never researched specific herbs. I think it's fun to do that. Just know that before you're ingesting unique herbs or things from your yard that you might not be sure are safe, just use extension resources or FDA resources before you're using those to cook with or to cure your illnesses. Definitely talk with the doctor first before you're using these remedies. But some of the herbs that we are so familiar with and use a lot are really good for us. They have lots of nutrients and vitamins. And that strong flavor is great as a substitute for salt as well. So herbs are really great in the kitchen and the garden. Okay, so a little bit about growing them. I honestly don't have very many slides on how to grow herbs just because it's so easy to grow them. They grow pretty much anywhere and really with very low maintenance, honestly, compared to other plants. So kind of the number one thing you want to think about is sunlight. So that would be the location you choose of where you plant your herbs. Most of them will need about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day. So that's pretty common for our normal garden crops, like our tomatoes and our peppers. They need as much light as we can give them. And for herbs, we need to give them as much sunlight as possible because those oils, those essential oils that we talked about, those are produced in the most and the best when they're given full sunlight. So that means they're going to have greater flavor for your recipes when you're giving them 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. So, and this is not necessarily true for all herbs. There's a few exceptions that will do okay in shade, but quite a few of them like that heavy sunlight. Good garden soil is important. A lot of them need drainage for their roots. They don't like heavy clay soils. And then we'll find out that they don't need a lot of fertilizer. Highly fertile soils actually kind of produce lots of foliage, but it's not very good in flavor. So especially if you're putting on a lot of nitrogen, sometimes that happens with our tomatoes. If we give them too much nitrogen, they'll produce lots of leaves, but not very many fruits. And that's sort of the same concept here. They'll produce big plants, but they won't necessarily have as good flavor. So just think about that. They don't need maybe as much as we're giving the other plants. And then just make sure they are getting drainage. They don't like to have wet feet. So if you do have very heavy clay soil, you might consider growing them in pots or trying to amend the soil. Okay, so most herbs are native to the Middle East, so they prefer really hot and dry climates. So most of the time that's great for Kansas. We have, when I think about July and August, it's usually pretty hot and dry. So a lot of times they'll do just great. And there are a lot of ways you can use them in your landscape, which is one of the reasons I like them so much. You can use them for ornamental purposes. This picture kind of shows that they're in pots. They're maybe on a deck close to a kitchen, so you can easily use them in your recipes. And they just look really, really nice. So there's definitely uses for them besides just in your garden beds. A lot of them are uniquely textured and have cool colors and things like that that make them ornamental plants, not just vegetables that you're growing. So you don't have to hide them in your backyard with your garden, which we'll talk more about landscaping them closer to the end. But the main point again is just make sure you find a sunny spot. That way they'll be happy, and make sure they drain well. One other thing you might consider before you plant your herbs is note if it is an annual or a perennial. And that's just gonna tell you how long you can keep it, if it's gonna stay for one season or if it's gonna be there for the long haul. And that's important to know before you start planting a bunch of herbs in your landscape. Okay, so when we talk about planting, there are lots of different ways you can plant them, which is another reason why I really like them. It's fun to have so many different options when we're using herbs and planting them in the landscape. So we can do seeds like we would normally think of for a lot of vegetable plants or plants. We can do them that way, but there are other ways as well for perennial plants and even some annuals. We can transplant them, use transplants from like garden centers. And then perennials can be divided and started from cuttings, which is an awesome way to get free plants. Okay, so if you're starting from seed, just know that it can be sort of a slow process. So for perennial herbs, a lot of times seed is harder to grow. For the annual herbs that we'll talk about, seed is pretty easy, but if you're wanting to grow rosemary or lavender, it can be a slow process. So a lot of times we'll want to start them in pots or in flats in the late winter time, so indoors, under an artificial light or a very sunny window. You can see in that bottom picture, that is mint seeds, and they're very, very small. If you can tell, that's a penny beside it. So those seeds are just very hard to work with. And honestly, the germination on them, it's pretty hard. So if you're planting perennial seeds, I definitely recommend to start from either a plant that is already grown and you can transplant and divide it, or buy some plants from a garden center, because they are a little bit difficult. They like heavy light, but also a cool environment for best germination. So, and again, that's for perennial herbs. If you are doing things just like dill or basil, those will be fine planted directly from seed into your garden. Okay, so a little bit more about propagating them. There are a variety of ways you can do it. Probably the one everyone's common and knows about is division. It's really easy just to dig up the plant, and like this top picture showing, they just pull the plant apart and you get several plants out of one plant. So that's actually something that benefits the plant. They like to be divided about every 2 to 4 years, or 3 to 5 years, when they are about 2 to 4 years old. So it really helps your landscape just to thrive. They like to be divided, but make sure you're keeping them watered once you plant those new transplants. And then, so that's good for a lot of perennial herbs like chives and mint, the things that really spread. You can also take cuttings of certain herbs. Lots of different ones work well for this, and you just take a cutting of the tip about 3 to 5 inches long. You want some really healthy growth on the tip of the stem, and then you can root that. You can do it in some moist soil or even in some water a lot of times. And in about 2 to 4 weeks, you'll have enough roots that it should be able to survive on its own as a plant. So there's a really cool YouTube video over this that is a great resource if you're interested in learning how to take cuttings. In the video, he actually uses cuttings from the grocery store. He buys herbs from the grocery store and then roots them and creates tons of plants for his garden. So it's kind of a cool resource. I'll link that in the email I send after the program. The last technique, which is one that I think is really fun and kind of a cool way to create new plants, it's called layering. And that's what these bottom 2 pictures are showing. It can be used on pretty much any herb that is a perennial and that has kind of flexible branches. So you choose a stem that's pretty close to the ground and that's flexible enough to bend to the soil. And then you bury that about 6 to 8 inches deep with soil. And you can kind of pin that with some wire, or this person in the photo is using a clothespin. You can pin that down and it will eventually start to grow roots. And the cool thing is it's growing those roots while it's still attached to the parent plant. So it's still getting nutrients and still being a healthy plant. And then the following season, so next spring, that you should have enough roots that you can cut that portion from the parent plant and have a new plant to grow in your garden. So that's a fun way to create many plants from the one plant you have. And I think it's fun to, if you have a big lavender plant or something, you can try that and then give your transplants to your neighbors or start a new lavender bed somewhere else. So it's a fun technique if you've never tried that. Okay, just a little bit about growing herbs indoors. I know a lot of people want to just have herbs right on their kitchen windowsill, and you can do it. It's just not as productive. So herbs grown indoors are just, a lot of times they'll be shorter and a little bit leggier than those grown outside, just not as healthy. So what I do recommend is to try to move them outside during the spring and summer, just so that they are getting a boost in their growth and developing stronger roots. And then in the winter, when you do want them inside, just give them as strong a window as you can, a south-facing window, or use some supplemental lighting so that they get what they need. There are a lot of cool systems now where you can grow them on your kitchen countertop. They kind of have a grow bed at the bottom and then lights on top, and they just go right on your kitchen counter. So if you really do want to grow herbs right in your kitchen, that might be something to look into, because those are available in lots of different places. So in the link I'll send out, there's also another YouTube video about growing herbs indoors. There's a few that do better than others, so she kind of goes over that in the video. Okay, so a lot of our perennial herbs that we grow from year to year will benefit from a little bit of protection over the winter. And that's just because, remember, they're native to the Middle East, so our winters can be a little harsh. And they also have very shallow roots, so they can be heaved out of the ground when one day in the spring it's going to start thawing, and then the next day it might get cold again. So that kind of messes with the root systems. So giving them a little bit of mulch will help protect the plant. Usually just a 4-inch covering of, this is kind of some straw hay we used, but you can use fall leaves, and basically anything that you have around. It doesn't have to be fancy, just to help the herbs over the winter. These pictures are from our community gardens in Beloit, and it's kind of a limestone planter that we have. It is above ground, so the herbs are exposed over the winter, but we've had really good luck with everything coming back. Our lavender always comes back. I believe the rosemary has always done pretty good. So yeah, just a little bit of extra covering over the winter can help quite a bit. So, okay. Before we start talking about the specific herbs, does anybody have any questions or comments? You can just shout it out or write it in the chat box, whatever you prefer if you have any questions. Does anybody grow herbs?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good.
Cassie, there's a question in the chat. They would like to know what city bed you're talking about.
Okay. So it is in Beloit, and it's at the North Campus Gardens. So it's kind of, we have kind of where an old girls' school used to be there, I think, and now it's kind of our police station, but they've created part of that into a community garden. And then the herb bed is available, like anyone can come harvest the herbs. But yeah, it's a really cool limestone planter. I'm not sure how long it's been there, but it definitely would be exposed to like the wind and the winter conditions we get in Kansas. And most of our perennial herbs do come back, so that's a good thing. So, yeah. Oh, tried and failed. What herbs have you tried? Yeah, sometimes the perennial ones can be a little bit harder. I'm gonna go over some annual herbs, and they're definitely ones I would recommend you start with if you're new to gardening or new to herbs. And these you can find as transplants, you know, from your garden center, or if you have big grocery stores around you, which I know most of us probably don't if you're in North Central Kansas, but sometimes Dill stores will have little herb plants you can buy as well. So, okay. So I'm just gonna go over a few of the most popular ones. I'm not gonna talk all day, even though I could talk all day about herbs. Let's see, okay. So annuals, these are the ones that are going to complete their life cycle in one growing season, so they will not survive our winters. You can try to bring them inside if they're in pots or something, but again, they likely won't do as well as they would outside when they're in the garden. So, okay, the first herb is basil. This is one of my favorite herbs and probably one that's pretty popular for people. The name in parentheses there is the Latin name of the plant. I just like to show everyone that because you'll see that some of it kind of makes sense when we're going on a few herbs later on. But basil is a very heat-loving plant. So I think of planting it, you know, when you start to plant your tomatoes and your peppers, things like that. It doesn't like cold temperatures. So night temperatures below 55, day temperatures in the below 70s, it can get kind of stunted. So definitely make sure you're putting it out later in the season. If you want to keep it actively growing, you need to remove the flowers. And that is because once they start flowering, the leaves kind of taste bitter and just not as good quality. So make sure you're kind of snipping off the top and continually harvesting the basil. I actually think this is a good thing because the flowers on the herbs on basil is really pretty. So you can use that in flower arrangements and bring them inside. When you're storing it, I've heard different things about this, but I recommend not putting it in the refrigerator because it can get kind of, it just doesn't taste as good once you do that. It definitely likes room temperature or warm temperatures. One thing you'll see when we're talking about these herbs is that they like, or that they have many different types. So you can see we have a green type here in that container, and there's also purple basil, but there are probably hundreds of different varieties of basil you can find. So it's fun to kind of experiment with those different types. And then it pairs well with lots of different foods, definitely tomatoes and pasta, things like that. A fun fact about basil is that it is the Italian herb for love. So in early Rome, young suitors would wear a sprig of basil to signal their marital intentions, which I just thought that's kind of funny. I like learning the history of some of these herbs, but this is definitely an easy one to grow if you've never tried it. Okay, next is cilantro, and it is kind of unique because it has two names. When we are talking about the foliage or the green part of the plant, we call that cilantro, and then the seed is called coriander. And you can kind of see that there in the Latin name, see where they get the coriander from. But you can use both parts of the plant. The seeds kind of have a different flavor than what the leaves do. This is a plant that you can plant directly in the garden. So it does not do well with transplants. Those are big seeds that germinate really well. It is also kind of different than basil and some of the other herbs because it does well in cool weather. And actually when it gets hot in July and August in Kansas, it goes to seed. It will start to bolt, which just means that it's starting to end its life cycle. So this is an herb you could definitely plant now in the early spring to harvest it early. And it can also handle a little bit of shade. So this is kind of the unique herb that likes a little bit cooler and a little bit of shade. It goes well with Mexican dishes. I think of cilantro with fresh salsa, tomatoes and onions. That's my favorite way to use it. So, and a lot of people either love it or hate it. I don't know how you guys feel about cilantro, but some people say it has a soap taste, and there is there's some science behind that. There's a chemical compound in the plant called aldehyde, which is actually used in soap making. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think it does have to do with your genetics too, of whether you can taste that compound or not. Hopefully all of us like it and don't think it tastes like soap. Oh no.
I think it tastes like soap.
Oh man.
Didn't know it was genetic though. That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's whether you can taste that compound or not is kind of in your genes. So okay, the last annual I'll talk about is dill. This is another one of my favorites. I remember growing up, my grandma had a big patch of dill, and then she would always make dill pickles. So I love dill. She called it dill weed growing up, and that is usually what the green part of the plant is called. And then the seed we use a lot for seasoning as well. But all parts of the plant can be used. We can use the seeds, the leaves, even the flower head. All of that is edible. I think one of the reasons why people call it dill weed is because it can kind of become a weed. Those seeds, it creates lots of seeds throughout the season, and they tend to go all over, shatter all over the garden of where you plant it. So kind of keep that in mind when you're picking a spot of where you want it in your garden, because it can definitely become a weed. This top picture, I don't know if you can see that caterpillar, it's kind of hiding but caterpillars love dill. A lot of pollinators actually really like many different kinds of herbs, but dill is definitely one of them. This is a black swallowtail caterpillar. So, and they will eat some of the herb plants. So if you think that's going to be a problem, just plant one for you and plant one for them, because they will grow into big butterflies and pollinate your garden. So I think it's kind of a benefit of planting herbs. Okay, now I'm gonna go over a couple of perennial herbs. So these are the ones you might have to protect over the winter. Hopefully they'll come back every year. And usually these ones do, they're pretty tolerant and hardy. So chives, we talked about chives earlier. Those are the purple flowers there. Those are edible. I think they're really pretty as well. So if you've never tried to eat them, you might try it this year, adding them to your salad. But this is in the onion family. So allium is the onion family, and it is the only plant grown in the onion family that is not grown for its bulb. So you normally, we think of onions grown for that underground bulb portion, but these we grow chives for the leaves, the onion flavored leaves. So they grow in clumps of about 8 to 10 inches tall. They're very easy to divide, like we talked about dividing, because they can really grow and kind of become invasive in a garden. So if your neighbor has a lot of chives, you might want to ask them if you can take a little division and start some of your own. This bottom picture kind of shows you how you can snip them right off the plant. You don't have to snip all of them like this person did. You can definitely just cut some and then cut some more when you need them again. But you can harvest them just like that, about 2 inches from the ground. So that's not going to hurt the plant at all to cut them like that. They go good with tomatoes and fish and soup and pretty much everything, I think. I love onion flavor. So. Okay, next we have mint. And again, like we talked about, herbs have many different varieties. So there's catnip, spearmint, peppermint. I've seen lots of fun things. I've seen like lemon mint, chocolate mint. It's a fun one to get creative with and try new things. I would tell you that these can be invasive, so just be careful. They do like to spread and they can kind of take over a garden area. So you might want to grow it in containers if you're kind of scared and don't want to be pulling out mint forever. This one does require sunlight to really get those essential oils into the leaves, and it can handle a little bit more moisture. So it has roots that are kind of close to the surface, close to the ground surface, and they need a little bit more water. And then mint is best served fresh. You can use it in drinks and fruit salads, things like that. Okay, so the last perennial I wanted to talk about is lavender. And this is probably one of my favorite plants. I love, my favorite color is purple, so it makes sense that this is a great plant to have in my garden. This picture is from a lavender field in France. I just think that's so beautiful, but there are actually fields of lavender in Kansas. There's a big one in Bennington, Kansas, kind of near Salina. I know there's quite a few around if you ever want to go see a lavender field and harvest some lavender. But you can also grow it in your own garden. So they're very easy to grow. They like a little bit higher pH. They can tolerate that, which is good because our soils sometimes are kind of crummy soils and they can be high pH. Again, there's many different types and varieties of lavender. And then a lot of times we use them in potpourri or perfumes, but you can cook with them as well. You can use them in jelly and tea and even lemonade. So I think it's a really fun plant. I just planted one last weekend in a container. So I'll see how that does. It's with some petunias and sweet potato vine. So I think it's gonna look really good. I love the color. Okay, are there any
Under
questions?
70 degrees in here. I bet the furnace comes on tonight.
It might.
I have a question. I've tried to grow lavender 2 years in a row, and I, some survived last year, and it's probably because I didn't mulch them enough, like you said to do. But if it's not greening up right now, is it pretty much safe to assume that they are dead?
That's a hard thing to say. Yeah, it should probably be greening up by now.
Okay.
Do you have more than one plant? Could you like kind of dig one up and see if the roots are alive, or?
How would I tell if the roots are alive? If
So
they're
if it's
supple?
Yeah, you probably, I definitely think you should be seeing green growth at the bottom by now.
Okay.
Did you cut back any of it last year?
No. Do we need to cut it back in the fall when it gets colder? And then
No,
mulch over the
you
top?
can leave it. You can leave it and do it in the spring. If you haven't done it yet though, I would go ahead and cut it back.
Okay, we'll do that.
That way
then.
all the dead material's out of the way for it to grow.
How far down? Pretty close to the bottom?
Yeah.
Okay.
And hopefully maybe there is some green starting to pop up.
I hope so
bottom.
too.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, chocolate mint is good in brownies. Yeah, that sounds good. Rosemary and lavender keep ticks and flies away. I have heard that, and I know there are quite a few herbs that are proven to, or they say they keep ticks and flies away. I don't know if there's any science that really shows that, but yeah, I know our greenhouse sells like citronella plants and stuff, and some people swear they work, so that's awesome. I heard this year is already really bad for ticks.
Yeah, it
So
is.
that's,
Yeah.
I do not like ticks. Okay, I just have like a few more slides. We're gonna talk about harvesting, and then we're can wrap things up. So I like to show you these pictures just to give you some ideas of ways you can use herbs in the landscape. So I kind of talked about it earlier, but you don't have to put your herbs in your vegetable garden. You can use them in lots of ways in your landscape. They add fragrance to lots of areas, texture. They're great for pollinators. Butterflies love herbs. I have some chive plants growing outside, and the last few days they've been covered with butterflies. So they definitely like the flowers. If you need a good ground cover for your garden, a tall plant, a border, if you want some color, you can really find an herb plant that will do well in your landscape. I like this bottom picture in the corner because you can see they used a border around their bed of rosemary, which I think looks really cool. And again, you would kind of have to cover the rosemary in the winter so it would come back year to year, but I think it looks really striking to have that border. So you don't have to hide them. You can definitely play with them in your landscape. There's a good publication I'm gonna put in the link I'll send out about how to landscape with edibles. Okay, a little bit about harvesting the herbs. Really, it's not hard, and you really can't hurt your plant. They like to be cut back. The general rule is to harvest the leaves of the plant when they contain the optimum amount of essential oils. So you want to harvest them when they are going to taste the best and have the most oil. So a lot of times that's in the mornings. You want the dew to have dried. A lot of times herbs can get kind of moldy or mildewy if they're not dried off. Know that it's a continual process. So thankfully you should have herbs throughout the summer. just clipping what you need and then coming back and clipping again. Generally, you will harvest them before they bloom. So we talked about the basil, the cilantro. You want to harvest those leaves before they start to flower to get that best flavor. For plants that you are harvesting the flowers, if you want to harvest the lavender flowers or the rosemary flowers, harvest those as soon as the bud opens, and that way they have the longest life for you. But don't be afraid to cut them back. I know we have, you'll grow a beautiful plant and then you're scared to cut it maybe and use it. But perennials can be cut back about half their height, and then annuals can be cut back about 1 to 2 inches. So they really do like to be cut, and that often makes them bushier and happier. I like to point out this picture because it shows a good way of how to store herbs. A lot of times you want to store them in a jar like this with water, kind of like you would store fresh flowers that you cut from the garden or that you get from the flower shop. So they like to have that water. And then this shows she's putting a plastic bag on top. You can kind of see that baggie. You don't have to put the baggie on top. It just helps with the humidity a little bit, but definitely store them in water for longest shelf life. Okay, so that's pretty much all I have. I do want to tell you about the resources I use for this PowerPoint. My favorite resource we have is the Kansas Garden Guide. It's an awesome place to turn for all your gardening questions, not just about herbs, but vegetables, fertilizing, watering, and it is available online. And so I'll put that in the email I send out as well. The Herb Society of America is a really great resource. They have fact sheets on every herb, pretty much every herb there is. So if you've never grown fennel and you want to start growing fennel, there will be a publication on fennel and how to grow it and what it likes. So that's really helpful for some of those unique herbs that like special things or that maybe you have never grown before. And then the book I use for some of the history and the fun facts I told you is the Rodell's Illustrated Encyclopedia of Herbs. And it is kind of like a textbook. It's a big book, but it's really fun to learn the history and just read some of the crazy things they used to use herbs for and the mythology that they believed what would cure them. But anyway, those are some really good resources. So I will let anyone ask questions if you want, and then I have one more little herb poll we can take. Feel free, you can just shout out a question or comment, or you can put it in the chat, whatever you want.
What are the plants that people call them wild onions that like just kind of sprout up in your yard? Are they actual chives?
Yeah, they are. I don't know if you'd technically call them chives, but they are just a little type of onion that can become invasive. And I was kind of said that when I talked about chives, they really do spread. They kind of have those underground bulb tuber things, and they really can become invasive. And I know people do eat the ones out of their yard, so you could do that. Just make sure you haven't sprayed your yard with anything. Just know kind of, what's going on in your yard and make sure it's safe before you eat those. Okay, I'm gonna pull up one last poll. It's very quick. It's just kind of a fun little. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see that. Okay. So people are excited to plant lavender. Good. Lavender is really pretty. I love lavender. All the herbs, yes. And they do go really well together. So if you wanted to get a big pot, you could put a bunch of different herbs in it together and have a great herbs for your recipes during the summer. Okay, lots of different things we like to cook with: basil, chives, oregano, and cilantro. Okay. Oh, good. Okay, people are interested in growing herbs this year. Oh, I guess I did not share the results. Can you see the results now? Good. I hope everybody learned something about herbs and hopefully is encouraged to grow them, because they can be fun to experiment with and play with during the summer in recipes and in your landscape. So yeah, if anybody has any last questions, I'd be happy to answer them. You are also free to email me or chat in the box. I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay, and I do want to, before you guys go, I want to tell you that we are having another webinar next Thursday. So if you're free again Thursday afternoon, Kelsey, do you want to say what you're working on?
Yes, sure. I'd love to. We're going to cover some lawn care basics. So just what kind of grass grows best around the area, how and when to kill the correct weeds. I got a lot of questions on henbit this year, so we're going to remind everybody to take care of those this fall, and just some basic things like that.
Yeah, awesome. So I will, we'll send out the link for that again next Thursday, and it's the same time, 3 p.m., and that will be May 14th. So hopefully everyone's interested in joining that again. So